It started, as most of my worst and best days do, with coffee. Or more accurately, the lack of it. My beloved, stubborn old coffee machine finally gave up on me one grim Thursday morning, letting out a dramatic puff of steam like it was giving a deathbed monologue before going silent forever. I stood there, bleary-eyed and betrayed, wondering how I was supposed to function without caffeine. I had no time to mourn. I had an appointment downtown, a meeting with a recruiter I wasn't even that excited about. Some generic job lead I felt half-hearted about. A stepping stone, maybe, or a waste of time. I hadn't decided yet. In a panic, I grabbed my bag, sprinted toward the subway, and figured I could buy coffee on the way. Of course, the first cafe was closed for renovations. The second had a line out the door long enough to qualify as a landmark. Sweating and desperate, I spotted a third, some fancy-looking building with a slick coffee bar visible just inside the lobby. I didn't even hesitate. I barreled through the revolving doors, beelined for the counter, and ordered the first latte I could pronounce correctly. As I waited, checking my watch anxiously, a sharply dressed woman approached, eyeing me like she was expecting someone. "You're here for the brainstorming session, right?" she asked. I blinked, latte halfway to my mouth. Yes," I said, because my brain short-circuits when spoken to by people in heels and power blazers. "Perfect. We're just about to start. Conference room B." And before I could explain, she was already leading me down a glass hallway into a sleek conference room full of serious-looking people sketching on whiteboards and flipping through design mock-ups. I sipped my latte, heart hammering, and realized something horrifying. I wasn't in the right building. I wasn't even close. But now, apparently, I was attending a brainstorming session. And somehow, leaving felt more suspicious than staying. I took a seat. One accidental nod later, I was officially part of a meeting I knew absolutely nothing about. I slid into the nearest seat, praying I looked like I belonged, clutching my latte like it was the last shred of my sanity. Around me, people scribbled on notebooks, nodded thoughtfully, muttered things like synergy and market disruption. It was the Olympic finals of buzzwords, and I was wildly out of my league. I considered faking a sudden coughing fit to excuse myself. Maybe claim an urgent dentist appointment? But before I could hatch an escape plan, the woman who had ushered me in clapped her hand sharply. "Okay, team, quick intros before we dive in," she said, smiling at me like I was a new recruit. The first guy introduced himself, Tom, creative director. Then came Priya, brand strategist. Followed by Mark, product manager. Each title more intimidating than the last. When it was my turn, I panicked and said the first vaguely professional thing that popped into my caffeine-starved brain. "I'm Alex," I said. Not my real name, but we were way past real at this point. "I'm with concept development?" There was a pause. Then everyone nodded like this made perfect sense. The woman, who I now guessed was a big deal, beamed at me. "Perfect. We could really use a fresh perspective today." Fresh perspective. Right. Because what I lacked in qualifications, I made up for in sheer unfiltered terror. The session kicked off. Post-it notes flew. Diagrams emerged. Buzzwords stacked like unstable Jenga towers. I sat quietly at first, nodding, writing vague notes like engage the core demographic, and maybe less corporate, without the slightest clue what we were actually building. Something about a product launch, maybe? A lifestyle rebrand? An app to disrupt how we think about other apps? Then came the moment that would change everything. Tom turned to me, tapping his marker against the whiteboard. "Alex, what's your take?" New eyes are good. Good reaction. Every eye in the room swung toward me. I swallowed hard. This was it. Fight or flight. I couldn't flee without making a scene. I couldn't stall forever. So I did the only thing left. I told the truth. Sort of. "Well," I said slowly, from a new user's standpoint. "I think we're overcomplicating it. People don't want to feel like they're learning a second language just to use a product. They wanted to feel intuitive. Effortless. Like it was designed for them, not for the marketing team." The room went dead silent. I felt my face burn. Then shockingly, Priya nodded. Tom leaned back, smiling. "That's exactly it," Priya said. Tom scribbled something on the whiteboard underlined 3 times. Intuitive. Effortless. User first. I blinked, stunned. Had I just said something smart? Or were they just too polite to correct me? Either way, I was in. Way deeper than I ever intended. The meeting surged forward like a river after a dam breaks, and somehow, I kept getting swept along. Ideas were flying, post-it notes were multiplying like rabbits, and people started actively asking for my opinion. My opinion. I, who had entered this building solely to buy a latte, was now weighing in on brand tone, user engagement, even color palettes. At one point, Priya scribbled something I said on the giant whiteboard under a heading that read Key Insights. Every time someone nodded at me thoughtfully, a tiny voice in my head screamed, "You are so fired from a job you don't even technically have." But externally, I smiled and kept talking, riding a wave of pure adrenaline and sheer stubborn commitment to the bit. After about an hour, the meeting wound down. People gathered up their laptops and empty coffee cups, chatting excitedly about next steps and workshop deliverables. The big deal woman approached me, her expression warm but businesslike. "Alex," she said, "great stuff today. Seriously, we've needed someone to challenge our assumptions for a while." I opened my mouth to confess everything, but she plowed on. "We have a leadership offsite next week. You'd be perfect to help lead one of the innovation sessions." Leadership. Offsite. Innovation. I barely understood two-thirds of those words together in a sentence. Still, I nodded like my brain wasn't actively trying to leap out of my skull. "Sounds awesome." She smiled. "I'll have HR loop you into onboard properly. We'll get you access to the tools you need." Onboard. Properly. Access. Tools. Oh no. She handed me her business card and told me to email her availability by tomorrow. Then, just like that, she was swept into a group conversation, leaving me standing there alone in the rapidly emptying conference room, clutching the card like it was a golden ticket I had absolutely no right to possess. I checked my phone. Missed call from the recruiter I was actually supposed to meet. I stared at the screen for a long moment, weighing my options. Option 1. Admit the whole mistake, ghost this building forever, and go back to chasing jobs I didn't even want. Option 2. Lean all the way in. The thought terrified me and excited me. I slid the business card into my pocket, picked up my half-finished latte, and casually walked out of the conference room like I belonged. Maybe I did. Or maybe I was about to star in the most spectacular crash and burn story of all time. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, wandering the city with my half-empty latte in one hand and a head full of buzzing questions. Had I just accidentally gotten myself hired? Could I actually pull this off? What if they asked for my resume? Or references? What was I supposed to say? Freelance coffee drinker, highly skilled in improv and unplanned career pivots. By the time I got home, my phone buzzed with an email from a woman named Claire in HR. Subject: welcome. Next steps for onboarding. The body of the email was shockingly casual. "Hi Alex. So excited to have you with us. Attached are your onboarding forms. Please send your preferred email for internal systems and your start date availability. Let me know if you have any questions." I sat at my tiny kitchen table, laptop open, heart racing. Technically, they didn't have my last name yet. They just knew Alex. Technically, no one had asked for ID. Technically, no one had checked anything. It was all moving on momentum, assumption, and my increasingly concerning ability to nod and fake confidence. I opened the attached documents. Simple stuff. Emergency contact forms. Banking details for payroll. A tax form. Payroll. They were planning to pay me. I laughed, out loud, a short, startled sound, because it was just so absurd. A few days ago, I was dragging myself to a recruiter's office for a job I didn't care about. Now I was being onboarded by a company that thought I was a creative genius with sharp insights about user-first market positioning. I closed the laptop and paced my tiny apartment for a full hour, weighing my options. Finally, I sat back down and opened a new email. "Hi Claire. Thanks so much for reaching out. Excited to get started. Here's my preferred email address. I can be available to start next Monday. Please let me know what I should prepare ahead of time. Best, Alex." I hit send. And just like that, it was real. I spent the weekend doing frantic, secret homework. I Googled every possible buzzword they had thrown around in the meeting. I watched YouTube videos titled things like "How to Sound Smart in Creative Strategy Meetings." I made a list of generic but impressive phrases like "We need to center the end-user journey" and "Let's not silo innovation." I even practiced nodding thoughtfully at nothing in the mirror. By Sunday night, I wasn't sure if I was terrified or thrilled. Maybe both. Either way, I was all in now. Monday was coming. And so was my new, totally unplanned career. Monday morning arrived like a freight train full of nerves. I picked out the most creative professional outfit I owned, which in my mind meant clean jeans, a blazer that didn't scream "trying too hard," and sneakers that said, "I'm casual but I get things done." I rode the subway downtown rehearsing buzzwords in my head like I was cramming for a pop quiz. User first. Seamless experience. Cross-functional synergy. It all blended together into a corporate soup, but I was determined to at least sound like I belonged. I arrived 15 minutes early, which I figured would make me seem keen and reliable instead of, wildly underqualified. The receptionist smiled and handed me a guest badge with my freshly printed first name, Alex, and waved me toward the elevators like I was already part of the family. Inside the elevator, I gave myself a pep talk. You're here now. Act like you've been here forever. Nod thoughtfully. Ask smart questions. Don't touch anything expensive. The doors opened to a wide, sunny floor buzzing with energy. People in sleek outfits dashed around carrying laptops and mood boards. It smelled like ambition and overpriced cologne. The big deal woman from the brainstorm, who I now knew was named Meredith, spotted me immediately. Alex, glad you could make it, she called out, motioning me over. She was mid-conversation with a small group of executives. Before I could panic, she turned to them and said, "This is Alex, the fresh perspective I was telling you about." The executives smiled and nodded. One of them shook my hand and said, "Heard great things. Excited to see what you bring to the table." Bring to the table? I wasn't even sure what table we were sitting at metaphorically, but I nodded like I had quarterly projections tucked into my back pocket. Meredith handed me a sleek black notebook. "You're shadowing today," she said. "Absorb everything. Jump in when you have ideas." Shadowing. Absorbing. Ideas. Got it. I spent the day tailing meetings like a loyal golden retriever, jotting down notes, sketching mind maps that looked impressive but meant almost nothing, and perfecting my thoughtful nod. Surprisingly, the more I listened, the more pieces started fitting together. It wasn't rocket science. It was about empathy, common sense, and not being afraid to say, "What if we made this simpler?" At one point, I even threw out a suggestion during a workshop. What if we approached the product from a story-first angle instead of a features-first one? The room went quiet. Then someone said, "That's actually really smart." By 5:30, Meredith patted me on the back. "You're going to do great here, Alex." I rode the elevator down grinning like an idiot. Maybe I didn't stumble into the wrong life after all. Maybe I stumbled into the right one, just by accident. The next few days flew by in a dizzying blur of brainstorming sessions, coffee runs, and learning how to sound like I'd been part of the creative industry forever. Every time someone threw around terms like brand authenticity or experiential engagement, I nodded so convincingly I almost believed I knew what they meant. I got good at asking vague but smart-sounding questions like, "How do we envision the user journey evolving post-launch?" And people actually answered me seriously. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. By Thursday, they gave me my own little workspace, a sleek white desk with a view of the city and a tiny potted succulent that I was now responsible for keeping alive. Meredith swung by as I was awkwardly trying to log into my new company laptop and said, "We've got a big client pitch coming up next week. I want you on the team. You've got a fresh angle we need." I nearly dropped the laptop. Client pitch? Me? I smiled and said, "Of course. I'm excited." Inside, I was screaming. In a good way. After she left, I texted Sam, the friend who had originally invited me to the fateful rooftop party where this whole misadventure began. "Me, you're not gonna believe this. I accidentally have a full-time job now." Sam, "What? How?" Me, long story involving coffee, confusion, and apparently a knack for winging it professionally. Sam sent back 48 consecutive laughing emojis and then, "Sam, you're basically a legend." By Friday afternoon, I was sitting in a meeting room surrounded by very serious people discussing the pitch deck. Words like market penetration and scalability were thrown around like candy at a parade. At one point, Tom, the creative director, turned to me and said, "Alex, you want to walk us through your concept for the intro section?" There it was. My moment. I swallowed the rising panic, glanced down at the sketchy notes I doodled during lunch, and just spoke. I talked about storytelling, about emotional connection, about why people don't fall in love with features, they fall in love with feelings. I used all the buzzwords, but sprinkled them with enough real passion that it didn't sound rehearsed. When I finished, the room was quiet for a second. Then Tom nodded slowly and said, "That's it. That's the angle." Priya smiled at me across the table. Someone even clapped under the table, like a low, secret applause. I sat there, stunned. I wasn't faking it anymore. I was doing it. And nobody had any idea that it all started because I just really, really needed a latte. By the following week, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. People started looping me into meetings on purpose. They asked for my feedback on big presentations. At lunch, coworkers saved me a seat like I was part of the furniture in the best way possible. I even caught someone from HR pointing me out to a new hire and whispering, "He's one of our rising stars." Rising star? Me. A guy who once got fired from a smoothie shop because I forgot the difference between almond milk and heavy cream. The client pitch was the real test. We piled into a conference room filled with giant glossy posters, perfectly aligned charts, and a few strategically placed bowls of branded candy. I wore my best blazer, the one that screamed creative but approachable, and clutched my notes like a lifeline. The client, A group of executives so polished they looked like they had their own personal lighting crew, listened intently as the team ran through the presentation. Tom set the stage, Priya outlined the strategy, and then it was my turn. I stood up, hands only slightly shaking, and walked them through the emotional storytelling approach we developed. I talked about human connection, loyalty through authenticity, building not just a brand but a movement. I made eye contact. I smiled. I remembered to breathe. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then the lead client, the one with a suit so sharp it could probably slice bread, leaned forward and said, "That's exactly the direction we've been looking for. You guys just locked it in." The room practically exhaled in relief. I sat down, adrenaline pounding through me like a drum solo. Priya leaned over and whispered, "Nailed it." By the end of the day, the client had signed the deal. It was a huge win. There were high fives and celebratory coffees and a round of applause in the office that made me feel like I just won an Oscar. Meredith pulled me aside as people started filtering out for the evening. "You're a natural," she said, smiling. "Honestly, Alex, we're lucky you found us." I laughed, because if she knew the truth, she'd realize it was much closer to the other way around. Then she added, "There's something I want you to think about. Management's opening up a new strategic consultant role. It's a big step up. You'd have your own small team, bigger projects, more influence." I blinked at her, stunned. From wandering into the wrong building to being offered a promotion in less than a month? This wasn't real life anymore. This was some parallel universe where the clueless guy with the wrong coffee order became a respected professional. But Meredith was serious. "Take the weekend to think it over," she said. "We'd love to have you." I nodded, dazed. Because of course the choice should have been obvious. Except that weekend, something else happened. Something that would flip everything upside down. That Saturday started like any other lazy weekend. I slept in, made pancakes slightly burned on one side, and planned to spend the day pretending to clean while actually binge-watching shows I'd already seen. My brain needed a break after the wild sprint of the past few weeks. I figured I'd put off thinking about the promotion until Sunday, maybe Monday. I deserved at least one day where my biggest decision was whether or not to add whipped cream to my pancakes. I did. No regrets. Around noon, I decided to take a walk, clear my head, get some fresh air, maybe even peek into a new coffee shop that had just opened down the street. I was halfway there, humming mindlessly to myself, when I spotted someone sitting outside the cafe. The recruiter. The one from the meeting I had skipped the day I accidentally wandered into my new life. She was sipping an iced coffee, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake happening just 10 feet away. I froze on the sidewalk. 100 memories rushed back. The original plan, the boring job lead, the safe and tiny stepping stone that had somehow led me to where I was now. I could have just kept walking. She hadn't seen me. I could have disappeared into the crowd and pretended this moment never happened. But something made me step forward. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I just needed to see if the path not taken still tempted me. "Hey," I said awkwardly, waving. She looked up, squinting for a second before recognition hit her face. "Oh, you." I wondered what happened. "You totally ghosted me." I laughed, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, funny story about that." We chatted for a few minutes. She told me about the job I missed. It had been filled quickly. Apparently, it was a tedious admin role for a company known for high turnover and low morale. "Honestly," she said, laughing, "you probably dodged a bullet." I nodded, heart thudding weirdly in my chest. Because if I hadn't gotten desperate for coffee that morning, if I hadn't walked into the wrong lobby, if I hadn't been mistaken for someone important, I wouldn't be where I was now. I wouldn't even know what I was capable of. As we said our goodbyes, I glanced back at the shiny new coffee shop. For the first time in a long time, I realized something. Life doesn't always reward the people who have a flawless plan. Sometimes, it rewards the people willing to improvise when everything goes off script. And sometimes, it rewards the ones who aren't afraid to say yes to total chaos. That night, after my walk and my accidental glimpse into the life I could have had, I sat on my couch with my laptop open and the promotion offer email blinking at me from the screen. It felt heavy in a good way, like a trophy you earned by surviving a bizarre obstacle course you didn't even know you entered. I reread Meredith's message. "We believe you have real leadership potential here, Alex. Let's make it official." Leadership potential. The kid who once got locked inside a Staples because he couldn't find the exit was now being asked to lead a creative strategy team. Life was hilarious like that. I thought about everything that had happened, the brainstorming session I'd stumbled into, the fake it till you make it meetings, the accidental client pitch, and realized something important. At every moment where I could have backed out, I didn't. I kept moving. I kept adapting. I kept showing up. Maybe that's what leadership was underneath all the buzzwords and polished resumes. Not perfection, not flawless planning, just showing up, even when you were scared out of your mind. I drafted my reply. I'd love to accept the promotion. Thank you for believing in me. Excited for what's ahead. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. And just like that, my accidental career move became very, very real. The following Monday, the team threw a tiny celebration at lunch. Cupcakes, balloons, a huge cheesy card that said, "Welcome, boss," across the front. Someone even made a joke about how fast I had climbed the ranks. "You've got that mysterious cool vibe," Priya said, laughing. "Like you've seen stuff no one else has." If only she knew. Tom patted me on the back and said, "Honestly, Alex, sometimes the best people don't come from perfect resumes. They come from the weird paths. The ones who figured it out the hard way. The ones who know how to think on their feet." I smiled, warmth blooming in my chest. Because somehow, in the most ridiculous way imaginable, that was me. I wasn't the most qualified. I wasn't the most experienced. But I was there. I had stayed. And now, I had a team, a role, a future I actually cared about. All because of a broken coffee machine. The next few weeks felt like a movie montage, new projects, brainstorming sessions where people actually listened when I spoke, long days filled with post-it notes, whiteboard scribbles, and too many cups of coffee that thankfully came from fully functioning machines. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Like somehow, through a series of happy accidents and impulsive yes, I'd stumbled into a version of my life that finally fit. Meredith started looping me into bigger conversations, giving me real responsibilities. I led my first creative sprint, pitched an idea that got greenlit without edits, and even mentored a new hire who thought I was some sort of genius. Joke was on them, and on me, honestly. And then, just as I was settling into my new reality, the universe decided it wasn't done having fun with me. It started with a small email. A request from HQ to verify some employee data. Nothing alarming. Just standard HR housekeeping, they said. Fill out a short form confirming your role, your start date, and a few other details for their system update. No big deal. Until I saw the field labeled Official Position Application with a mandatory drop-down. Choices like internal transfer, external recruit, temp to full-time, and a blank space where it asked, recruiter contact name. Oh no. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart thudding. Technically, there had been no recruiter. Technically, I had never actually applied for this job. Technically, my origin story here was a mess of mistaken identity, caffeine addiction, and pure stubborn survival instincts. I could lie. Write down a fake recruiter name. Hope no one double-checked. Or, I could tell the truth. I closed the laptop without filling out the form. For the first time since this whole ridiculous journey started, I didn't know what to do. That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, thinking about everything. How hard I'd worked once I got here. How much I loved the people and the projects. How, if it all came crashing down, I'd lose not just a paycheck but a future I'd actually started to believe in. When the sun finally rose, painting a soft, stubborn light across my apartment walls, I made my decision. I was going to tell Meredith everything. The whole messy, unbelievable truth. Even if it cost me everything. Because sometimes, you have to risk it all to know if you really belong. I arrived at the office early that morning, earlier than I ever had before. The halls were still half-lit, the hum of fluorescent lights louder than the footsteps of the few other early risers. I had rehearsed my speech about 50 times during my sleepless night. But now, standing outside Meredith's glass-walled office, every version of it evaporated from my brain. I knocked anyway. No turning back. Meredith looked up from her laptop, smiled warmly, and waved me in. "Morning, Alex. You're early. What's up?" I closed the door behind me and sat down, feeling the chair creak slightly under my shifting weight. My palms were sweaty. My heart was doing the kind of gymnastics that should have earned it a gold medal. I started, clearing my throat. "I need to tell you something. Something kind of big." She leaned back, folding her hands patiently. "All right. Shoot." I swallowed. Hard. "I wasn't actually recruited," I said quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. "I never formally applied here. I wasn't scheduled to be at that brainstorming meeting. I was trying to buy coffee, and I got mistaken for someone else." Silence. Real silence. The heavy kind that makes you acutely aware of every heartbeat in your chest. I rushed on before she could say anything. I was at the wrong building. But when you pulled me into that meeting, I didn't know how to explain without making it worse. And then when you all assumed I was part of the team, I just kept going. I know it sounds insane. It is insane. But I love this job. I care about the work. I swear I'm not trying to scam anyone. I stopped, catching my breath. I'm really sorry. I looked down, unable to meet her eyes, waiting for the inevitable words. Pack your things. Leave your badge. HR will be in touch. Instead, Meredith said, look at me, Alex. I looked up, bracing. She was smiling. Actually smiling. Honestly, she said, it doesn't surprise me. I blinked. Wait, what? Meredith chuckled. We had a feeling something was off. No HR file. No recruiter notes. Claire flagged it during onboarding, but when we watched you in meetings, we realized something. You weren't just faking it. You were thriving. I stared, speechless. You jumped into chaos, adapted, learned fast, and made things better. That's exactly the kind of person we want here. Titles and resumes mean nothing compared to that. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. So no, she continued, laughing softly, you're not fired. In fact, if anything, this just makes the story even better. I laughed, a loud, relieved, almost hysterical laugh. Meredith stood up, extended her hand. Welcome officially, Alex. You earned your spot the hard way. I shook her hand, grinning like an absolute maniac. Somehow, by some miracle, I belonged after all. When I walked out of Meredith's office, the entire building seemed different, brighter, lighter, like someone had thrown open all the windows. I wasn't carrying a secret anymore. I wasn't an imposter waiting to get caught. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Maybe I hadn't arrived the traditional way, but who cared? I stayed. I showed up. I proved myself when nobody expected anything from me. And somehow, against all odds, I built something real. That afternoon, we had a small team meeting. Just the regular end-of-week roundup. But when I walked into the conference room, there was a cake sitting in the middle of the table with big, messy icing letters that read, Welcome officially, Alex. I burst out laughing. The whole team clapped and cheered, and Priya handed me a paper crown from a party store. You've been one of us for weeks, she said, grinning. Now it's just official. I wore the ridiculous crown the whole meeting, fielding mock-serious questions like, what's your first decree as official Alex? And when is casual sneakers day happening? Later, as I sat at my desk, picking confetti out of my keyboard, I realized something. None of this would have happened if everything had gone according to plan. If my coffee machine hadn't broken. If the cafe line hadn't been too long. If I hadn't walked through the wrong doors at the wrong time and said yes to pure, unscripted chaos. Sometimes, life isn't about following the carefully plotted path. Sometimes, it's about standing there in the middle of a wrong turn, heart-pounding, and daring to act like you belong anyway. As I packed up to leave for the day, Meredith passed by my desk and said, by the way, we're moving you to a bigger office next week. Part of the promotion. I laughed. Guess I'll have to buy a second succulent. She winked. Only if you promise to accidentally innovate something else while you're at it. I promised. And I meant it. Because from that moment on, I wasn't just showing up by accident. I was showing up on purpose. All thanks to one broken coffee machine, a lot of blind faith, and a little bit of ridiculous, beautiful luck.